You're just an obstacle. He'll choose me. The text message appeared on my phone at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, sent from a number I didn't recognize, but a person I knew all too well. Vanessa Sterling, my husband's business partner, his affair partner, and apparently now his life coach, had decided it was time for a heart-to-heart conversation about my marriage. I sat in my home office, surrounded by financial documents, legal folders, and months of evidence that would soon transform this condescending text into the most expensive message she'd ever sent. The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated 3 different private investigator reports, bank statements showing unauthorized transfers, and a timeline of lies that stretched back 18 months. Mark deserves someone who supports his vision, the next text read. Someone who understands what he's trying to build. You're holding him back. I almost laughed. Holding him back. If Vanessa had any idea what I'd been building over the past 6 months, she might have chosen her words more carefully. My husband Mark had been acting strangely since last summer. Late nights at the office, weekend business trips that couldn't be verified, and a sudden interest in upgrading his wardrobe and grooming habits. The classic signs that every spouse dreads but hopes they're imagining. But it wasn't the affair that had prompted me to hire private investigators and forensic accountants. It was the money. Mark had always managed our finances, claiming his business background made him better suited for investments and tax planning. I'd trusted him completely, focused on my career as a pediatric surgeon while he handled the practical aspects of our life together. That trust had been a mistake. The first red flag came when I'd tried to access our joint savings account to make a charitable donation and discovered that the balance was significantly lower than I'd expected. When I'd asked Mark about it, he'd explained that he'd moved money into higher-yield investment opportunities that would benefit our long-term financial security. The second red flag was the credit card statement that arrived with charges I didn't recognize. Expensive restaurants, jewelry purchases, weekend getaways to destinations we'd never visited together. Mark had dismissed these as business expenses that would be reimbursed by clients. The third red flag was Vanessa herself. Vanessa Sterling was a marketing consultant who had partnered with Mark on several real estate development projects. She was beautiful, ambitious, and possessed the kind of aggressive confidence that some men find irresistible. She was also, I would discover, completely without scruples when it came to pursuing what she wanted. Their business relationship had evolved into something more personal over the course of several months. What started as working dinners became weekend strategy sessions. Professional texts became personal conversations. Business trips became romantic getaways funded by our joint accounts. By the time I realized what was happening, Mark and Vanessa had been conducting their affair for over a year. But here's what they didn't know. I hadn't just been sitting at home, obliviously trusting my cheating husband and his manipulative partner. I'd been documenting everything. The private investigator I'd hired, a retired police detective named Patricia Wong, had provided detailed reports of their activities. Photos of romantic dinners charged to our credit cards. Documentation of weekend trips to luxury resorts. Evidence of jewelry purchases that had never made it home to me. More importantly, the forensic accountant I'd consulted had uncovered a pattern of financial irregularities that went far beyond affair-related expenses. Mark had been systematically draining our joint accounts to fund his business ventures with Vanessa. Money that I'd earned through years of medical practice, 12-hour surgeries, on-call rotations, and the kind of demanding schedule that builds substantial savings over time, had been quietly transferred into investments that benefited him and his partner. Worse, he'd been using my credit and my name to secure loans for their real estate projects without my knowledge or consent. Documents had been forged, signatures had been falsified, and my professional reputation had been leveraged to guarantee debts that I'd never agreed to assume. In legal terms, this was fraud. In personal terms, it was the complete betrayal of 15 years of marriage and trust. I know this is hard, Vanessa's third text read, but Mark needs to be free to pursue his dreams. Don't make this more difficult than it has to be. I screenshotted the message and added it to the folder labeled Evidence, Communications, that my lawyer would present in divorce court. She was right about one thing. Mark did need to be free to pursue his dreams. He just didn't realize that freedom was going to come with a price tag that would eliminate most of his assets and leave him starting over from scratch. The confrontation came 3 weeks later, though not in the way I'd expected. Mark had been working late again, or so he claimed, when I received a call from Patricia Wong with an urgent update. They're moving money, she told me. Right now. Mark and Vanessa are at First National Bank, and they're making significant transfers from your joint accounts into an offshore account that's been established under a shell company. This was it. The final theft that would complete the pattern of fraud I'd been documenting for months. How much? I asked. Looks like they're trying to move about $380,000. Everything that's left in your joint savings and investment accounts. I thanked Patricia and immediately called my lawyer, Elizabeth Crawford, who had been preparing for this moment since I'd first consulted her 4 months earlier. It's time, I told her. They're liquidating the accounts tonight. Perfect, Elizabeth said. We'll file for emergency injunctions first thing tomorrow morning. Judge Morrison is hearing emergency motions at 8 a.m. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was heartbroken about my marriage. That grief had been processed months ago as I'd watched evidence accumulate of Mark's betrayal. But because I was anxious about the legal battle that would determine whether justice would prevail over theft and manipulation. At 7:30 a.m., I met Elizabeth at the courthouse, carrying 3 bankers' boxes of evidence that would transform the next few hours into the most expensive morning of Mark's life. Judge Morrison reviewed our emergency motion and supporting documentation with the thoroughness of someone who had seen too many cases of financial abuse to take them lightly. Mrs. Hamilton, she said, looking at me over her reading glasses, these allegations are quite serious. You're claiming that your husband has committed fraud, forgery, and grand theft in connection with your marital assets. Yes, Your Honor, and I have extensive documentation to support these claims. Elizabeth presented the evidence methodically. Bank records showing unauthorized transfers, forged loan documents bearing my falsified signature, investment records proving that money had been moved without my knowledge or consent, and photographs documenting the affair that had motivated these financial crimes. Your Honor, Elizabeth concluded, Mrs. Hamilton's husband and his business partner have systematically looted the marital assets to fund their personal relationship and business ventures. We're requesting immediate asset freezing, restitution, and emergency spousal support while we pursue full prosecution of these crimes. Judge Morrison granted everything we'd requested. Within 2 hours, all of Mark's accounts had been frozen, his access to our joint assets had been terminated, and he'd been served with papers requiring him to appear in court within 48 hours to explain his financial activities. He called me at 2:30 p.m., his voice a mixture of panic and disbelief. Diana, what have you done? They've frozen everything. I can't access our accounts, I can't pay for anything, and there are lawyers calling about criminal charges. What I've done, I said calmly, is exactly what you'd want me to do if someone had been stealing from us for 18 months. Stealing? Diana, those were business investments. Everything I did was for our future. Our future? Mark, you've been having an affair for over a year. You've been forging my signature on loan documents. You've been transferring money that I earned into accounts that I didn't know existed. Exactly what part of that was for our future? The silence that followed was telling. How long have you known? He finally asked. Long enough to document everything properly. The divorce proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Elizabeth had prepared a case so thoroughly documented that Mark's lawyer advised him to settle rather than face criminal prosecution for the financial fraud we'd uncovered. The settlement negotiations took place in a conference room that felt more like a courtroom, with Mark and his lawyer on one side, me and Elizabeth on the other, and boxes of evidence stacked on the table between us. My client is prepared to agree to a 50-50 division of assets, Mark's lawyer began, in exchange for Mrs. Hamilton's agreement not to pursue criminal charges. Elizabeth laughed, actually laughed, and opened the first box of evidence. Your client has committed documentable fraud totaling over $400,000, she said. He's forged his wife's signature on legal documents, stolen money from joint accounts, and used marital assets to fund an extramarital affair. We're not negotiating a 50-50 split. We're discussing how much your client will be allowed to keep after restitution and penalties. The negotiations lasted 6 hours and ended with Mark agreeing to a settlement that awarded me 82% of all marital assets, required him to assume full responsibility for all debts associated with his fraudulent business ventures, and included a confession of financial misconduct that could be used in future criminal proceedings. Vanessa attended the final settlement meeting, probably expecting to console Mark afterward and begin planning their life together with whatever money he managed to retain. She sat in the hallway outside the conference room, wearing a designer suit that had probably been purchased with money stolen from my accounts, scrolling through her phone and occasionally glancing at the door with the confident expression of someone who believed she was about to win a long-fought battle. When Mark emerged from the conference room after signing the settlement papers, his face was white with shock and his hands were shaking. "How bad is it?" Vanessa asked, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "It's over," Mark said quietly. "Everything. The house, the savings, the investment accounts, the business assets. She gets almost everything." "That's impossible," Vanessa said, her voice rising. "Your lawyer said we'd keep at least half." "My lawyer didn't know about the forged documents," Mark replied, "or the unauthorized transfers, or the fact that Diana had been documenting everything for months. I approached them as they stood in the courthouse hallway, still processing the reality of their situation. "Vanessa," I said pleasantly, "I wanted to thank you for your text messages. They were quite helpful in establishing motive for the financial fraud." She stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "You see," I continued, "when someone systematically steals money to fund an affair, it's useful to have written evidence that the affair partner was encouraging and benefiting from that theft." "I never told him to steal anything," she protested. "No, but you did tell him that I was an obstacle to his dreams. And then you helped him remove that obstacle by participating in the theft of money that I'd earned through years of medical practice." The court found that quite compelling. I handed her a business card for a criminal defense attorney. "You're going to need this," I said. "The district attorney is reviewing charges for conspiracy to commit fraud. Apparently, helping someone steal their spouse's money is still illegal, even when you're in love." Mark and Vanessa left the courthouse together, but their relationship didn't survive the financial devastation that followed. Within 6 months, Vanessa had moved back to her hometown, unable to afford her lifestyle without the stolen money that had been funding their affair. Mark had declared bankruptcy and was working as a sales associate at a car dealership, trying to rebuild his life from scratch. Meanwhile, I'd purchased a new home, invested the settlement money in secure accounts that only I controlled, and started a foundation that provided financial education to women going through divorce. The experience had taught me something valuable about obstacles and dreams. Vanessa had been right that I was an obstacle, but not to Mark's dreams. I was an obstacle to their scheme to steal my money and build their future on the foundation of my financial destruction. Sometimes the best way to remove an obstacle is to prove that you were never the problem in the first place. A year later, I received a final text message from Vanessa's number. It was short and simple. "I'm sorry." I didn't respond, but I did screenshot the message and add it to my evidence files. Not because I expected to need it, but because it represented the final acknowledgement of what she'd known all along, that what they'd done was wrong, harmful, and ultimately self-destructive. Today, I maintain a successful medical practice and a comfortable life that's entirely my own. I've learned to trust my instincts about people and to document important relationships more carefully. Most importantly, I've learned that when someone calls you an obstacle, it's worth asking what exactly they're trying to accomplish. Sometimes the biggest obstacle to a criminal scheme is an honest person who refuses to be victimized quietly. Sometimes the worst nightmare for people who steal is someone who knows how to gather evidence and present it effectively in court. And sometimes the most satisfying response to being called just an obstacle is proving that you're actually an immovable force for justice. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you've ever been dismissed as an obstacle by people who were trying to harm you, this story is for you. Remember that documentation is your best defense, and patience is your most powerful weapon. Share this story if you believe that trust should be earned, not stolen. And subscribe for more stories about justice, resilience, and the satisfaction that comes from proving that honest people don't have to finish last. Thanks for watching. See you again in the next video. Stay stunned.